Good afternoon, everyone. This is Naishad Gadani coming to you from Melbourne, and it is 147th episode of Career Care Package. And today we are talking about Australian government jobs, how to write selection criteria so that you can get the jobs in the within the government sector. That's what we are going to talk about today. And to help us unpack this very complex and sometimes mysterious idea of writing selection criteria, we have found the best in Australia. And Carolyn Smith, she's joining us from Brisbane. She's an award winning resume writer and the selection criteria specialist. So if you got question about anything about selection criteria, please do not forget to tune in. And if you're tuned in, take somebody who you think that might this might be beneficial to them, because it might change someone's career as well. So, as usual, if you got questions, drop in the chat box and we will pick it up, the questions, and ask Caroline as well. But before we bring Carolyn Smith, let's welcome Caroline Brown.
Thanks, Naish, and it's fantastic to be here and really excited to have you here today, Carolyn, because so many people, even very good writers, get stuck on what to put on selection criteria and get, put off to actually apply for the job. And I think even good writers miss out because they don't address criteria properly. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. So a good place to start, I reckon, would be just for the understanding of our audience, for you to tell them about the work that you do in helping people find jobs with resumes and selection criteria.
Okay, well, I'm actually a certified resume writer, master resume writer, but I find the bulk of my work I'm actually doing for the public service sector. So I specialise in government jobs, and I do those specifically because I love the complexity of them. So because they are complex, that's what I love about them. But basically, the majority of my clients would actually be those already within the public service sector, and they're seeking promotions and really struggling because they get to a benchmark where they can't go up because they're not providing sufficiently evidence-based and strong applications. And I also help those people also trying to nail and get into the government in the first place, because it's a very specific type of process, and those outside the public service sector don't really understand it. So I do help those clients not only understand the process, but in terms of writing the application.
Yeah, fantastic. So why does the government have this process? Why do they use that? They used to call it merit selection. I don't know if they do that anymore, but yeah, why do they have that in place?
Always about merit. So the key basis is that all selection in government is done based via legislation. So, for example, at the federal level, it's the Public Service Act. It's embedded in legislation, which means that all jobs need to be advertised and they all have to go through a particular process of selection. And selection criteria is just one part of that process. And it's all designed about people being selected purely on the basis of merit, that they can demonstrate the skills, knowledge and experience that they have. And one of the primary reasons for having that process is to stop nepotism within government.
I believe that did happen quite a lot before they put it in place, so many years ago. For people who are wanting to be sitting with an ad and going, what do I do now? Like with the criteria, what would you say is the best place to start to write the criteria?
Okay. Before you even start writing the criteria, you have to address a couple of things. Yeah. The first is to actually know that you're suitably qualified for it, because unless you've actually got the particular skills, ability and experience, it doesn't matter how well crafted your response is going to be, you're still not going to get shortlisted. because you've got to realise that you're going to be competing against people that already do have these skills and experience. So the first thing I would say to people before they even start writing their application is to go down the duties and responsibilities list of a particular job, not necessarily the selection criteria. And if they can tick off the majority of those particular duties that they've done, then they know they're going to be a good fit, and hence it's worth their time to apply for that job. So that would be the first thing I would say to people. Don't bother putting pen to paper until you know it's worth your time actually applying for it. Because the reality with government is, even if you were the only job candidate that applied for that role and you didn't meet the requirements, they'll just simply re-advertise.
Oh, that's a great tip though, because these things take a long time. I'm sure they take you a long time to write, but people who don't write them, they probably take double or 3 times the amount. So,
So then, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, what you sounded like you had a second big tip there for people.
Yeah, no. So the second tip is make sure that you're suitably qualified. Don't waste your time on applications when you're not going to have a chance of getting through, regardless of how well you write it. And my second tip is, before you start writing anything, you've got to realise that you have to provide evidence. So you need to start understanding some of the methodologies used in government in terms of how to write these selection criteria. And I can go in more detail with further questions down the track, but like I said, you have to understand the background to how these are placed and the structure of the process before you even put pen to paper.
Okay.
Yeah, is it, Caroline, obviously, writing selection criteria can, give people nightmares. A lot of people, literally say, you know what, I might just as well don't write this because it's just too much for me. And I've seen even people who are competent, they just don't follow this, because a couple of things that my observation is that I don't know whether they have already formally selected a candidate or not. And I'm writing this, humongous selection criteria for 8-9 pages just for me to improve my communication skill, and then I'll get a response that they found somebody else who's more suited, for the role. Is it normal for people to find this very challenging and difficulty to understand, or is it just that certain people only find it challenging, or do you see that this challenges is right across every vocation and every profession?
Everybody finds it challenging. So you're just joining the large team of people who find it challenging. The reality is, the bulk of my work is from people already within the public service sector, and they find it challenging, and they already have a good understanding. I mean, in the public service sector, they even train their staff on how to write things. So if you're an outsider, you haven't got any of this training or background, so of course you're going to find it incredibly frustrating. The other thing is, it doesn't matter what level the client is, they all find it frustrating. So, I commonly work for people at the senior executive level. I've even worked for commissioners right at the very, very top, and they find it difficult. So, in answering your question, everybody finds it. Very, very few people. I would say I could count on one hand the number of people who have provided me with documents that have totally nailed it.
So you mentioned that you actually really enjoy it, Carolyn. So I guess that speaks to what kind of skills do you need to be a good writer of these documents? What angle are you looking at it with people, or what's the approach that you're taking?
To me, they're like jigsaw puzzles. So on one hand, you're eliciting all the evidence from your clients in terms of the examples, and on the other hand, you're putting in into a jigsaw puzzle that's going to directly address the specifics of the selection criteria. Because within government, you not only have the selection criteria, you also have all the performance indicators, and you have all the sub-criteria. I'm sure you've seen them, like strategic, influence, achieves results, communicates with influence. And under there's multiple bullet points that go underneath there. So it's just a matter of putting a jigsaw puzzle together so that you're addressing all those elements, and at the same time being able to demonstrate your particular client's strengths and the results that they have achieved. So that's why I love writing them, because they are complex.
So we need to clone you. I think that's we have another 25 Carolyns. So, yeah. So tell me, we've got a question, I think if we can jump to it next, but I just wanted to pick up on that thing that you said about the methodologies. There's different methodologies that you might use. It's probably a good time to kind of dig into those a bit. Yeah,
that would be a perfect time, because basically when you're addressing selection criteria, you have to provide evidence. So you can't make belief statements and say, hey, I'm Joe and I've got great communication skills. That's just not going to cut it. You have to be, I'm Joe or Jane, and I've got excellent communication skills, and my specific examples to demonstrate this are X, Y, and Z. Now, the best methodology to use to give evidence, because they're all evidence-based, is to use what is called the STAR model. Now, lots of people have heard the STAR model, and basically it's almost a script of the way that you're writing them. So the S stands for situation, the T is for task, the A is for actions, and the R is the result. So it's basically taking examples from your work and putting it into that methodology. And by doing that, you're forced to provide evidence instead of making a belief statement about what you've achieved. So 2 things that you need to be aware of when you're doing the STAR methodology. The first is that the example has to be relevant to the job. There's absolutely no point providing an example that's not relevant. So people get called out, say, for communication skills. They will draw something on a job that's completely irrelevant to the job that they're applying for. So it's essential to get an example of communications that's most closely aligned with that job. So, for example, if you were a policy officer, you wouldn't like an example of how you used your communication skills in writing complex policy briefs, because that's a particular communication skill involved with a policy job. So that's the first thing I would say, sorry. And the second thing is, the R is the most important part of the STAR. Talk about the result. It's all about the result. It's all about that tangible outcome, the impact that you made, whether it's percentages, changing a work pattern, eliminating duplication, enhancing profits. It doesn't matter, but make sure that key emphasis is on the result and the outcome, because too many people get bogged down into lots and lots of micro details with their actions. But the truth is, nail the R. Put the context in, like what your challenges were, the context of the story, and then nail the R, and you should be good.
Yeah, fantastic. Nesh, do you want to read out that question?
Sure. So we got a question that there are so many items in the 5 to 6 page of position description published along with the job, and then there are selection criteria for some roles, and also several capabilities like integrity, business enabler, communication, customer focus, manage self, and the list goes on. And each subject has a few bullet points under. What needs to be addressed in the resume and what in the cover letter? I try to cover everything in the resume and the cover letter, but it hasn't been any chance for me to get an interview.
Okay.
So I would think that there is a selection criteria is a separate document to cover letter and a resume, and that's where you specifically address those things. That's what it is. But if you can also answer the other question on the same page, around a lot of the time the organization asks you to that, like similar to the integrity.
Yeah.
Right. So Key selection criteria is integrity or manage self. How do you, obviously isolation has taught a lot of us to manage ourselves, but whether can you draw upon those personal experiences also? There has to be also strictly professional, Caroline, if you can sort of give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, you've given me multiple layers. So, to be honest, I don't know, the one that you're reading off the script is actually might be the New South Wales Performance Framework, which does have that whole level of performance things that they want, and then they're asking you on top of that to address the selection criteria or specific questions or behavioural questions or something like that. I always say to people that read the actual job requirements. If they're telling you to address the selection criteria, that's what you need to address, not the full list of bulleted points, the performance criteria, and vice versa. Or they might do something which is very, very common, where they'll go, give us an overview of your skills and experience in line with the jobs, keeping in mind this 5-page list of requirements. You see that as well. Mm-hmm. So I always say to people, don't stress too much about meeting each and every single minute point. Get to grips with the overall context of what the role involves, and then within one example you can actually address 3 or 4 multiple parts of that in just one example. Going back to the integrity question, if I always say integrity is the one that people stuff up the most, okay, in terms of the way they address it. But integrity is basically, in terms of the honesty, providing straightforward advice, it's adhering to legislation, it's making those bold decision-making. Integrity is also tied up with your ability to take initiative, work overtime. There's multiple layers to integrity, and I always think personally, particularly if going for senior positions, you need to nail an example from work, not some personalised spec. So a perfect example of integrity would be having those difficult performance confrontations with your staff. Somebody's not working to the level and you're not scared to pick up the mantle and say, hey, you're not performing to the level required. That would be the level of integrity. Another level of integrity one would be is if you noticed a shortfall in the office in regards to governance practices, governance and compliance practices, and you address those by raising it up to the next level. That also would be integrity. So integrity is not just about saying, I'm an honest bloke, I haven't gone to jail.
That's a good start. A good start.
But yeah, most people do it very badly, that one.
Yeah. What about, when advertisement has a contact on it to call, should you always call a contact? And yes. What should you say when you're there?
2 things about contacts is not all of them are going to be particularly useful, but it's always worth a try. Sometimes they're going to just be HR officers that know very little about the position and they're just going to give you a whole lot of nothing. Some you won't be able to get hold of. They will ignore your calls. And some are actually on the panel that will be assessing your application. So I always personally think they're useful. The first is that you can ask specific questions about the role, so you get a feel about the reality of the role, because so often these generic criteria don't give you a really good sense of what is involved. So I think it's always wise to ask the contact officer what the challenges were, what would be the first issues I'd need to address if they secured the position, what were the key skills and abilities that they were looking for. You will get a very different view and perspective about the requirements of the job, and you can use that to shape your application. So I often ask my clients, look, go and find out more about this, because I think it's really important that we get the overall start, and from that you can get a really good background as to why the job's open and what challenges a person would have to face. And then if you're providing evidence of that in your application that you're up to the job of meeting those challenges, I think it can really help. And the second reason why you should ask is you should ask if there's somebody acting in the position. Because in government, because of the way legislation is written, sometimes a person might be an incumbent in their position for many months. So they might have actually been in the position acting for a long time, and they will be applying for that job. And if there's already an incumbent in place, you have to be aware of that. And there's two approaches that you can take. If you believe strongly that you're a very, very strong candidate, I say go for it 100%, whether there's an acting person in there or not, because not every person acting in the position is good at what they do, right? And the panel might legitimately be open to new blood. But if you don't meet the bulk of the performance requirements and you find out somebody's acting in it, then you know you're probably wasting your time applying for it. Because the only reason acting people have the advantage is that they can provide evidence in their application of the exact job. So that gives them the advantage.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't do these very often, but when I do, I always get them to ask that question, but not ask it as the first question, because just because you want to get information out of the panel and that type of thing as well. So yeah. Naish, look like you're about to say something.
Yes. Yeah, one of the question is around the length of response. Because I think that 3/4 of a page, if you can't get one page, 3/4 of a page is sufficient. If you can kind of qualify everything in, you've written your heart out and you provided a proper example. But what are your best practices around what is considered, and does a half-page response is considered a negative, or does it? How do people
several things. The good news is most governments now mandate how long it's going to be. Yes. So they're very specific in terms of word count. And instead of having, apart from, you'll find in selection criteria in universities, which are notorious for long and complex applications that go on like War and Peace, most government agencies now have streamlined the system down, so they're now just asking your resume and a statement, be it 750 words or 1,500 words, or they'll actually be very specific and say only 300 words per question within an application sheet. So that solves that problem. But if you're not given a specific length, I always say the shorter the better in many cases, and I'm not talking about a couple of paragraphs. I guess I'll put it this way, I don't think there's any right or wrong length when you haven't been given a specific how much you should write, but the right and wrong content. So if you're rambling and you're boring the panel members and you're not nailing the selection criteria of evidence, that 2 pages is going to be completely discarded. You're going to send the panel member to sleep, because you've got to remember, real people are reading this at the upper end. So in my opinion, succinct and concise. And I think these days, I don't think I go past half page, 3/4 page, even on the very long and complex ones. Yeah.
And is that because you've got if you've got 2 or 3 really good examples, they're going to be the examples that you present, and then the rest is just going to be filler, really.
Fluff and nonsense. And there used to be a lot of fluff and nonsense 15 years ago, where everybody thought they had to write War and Peace. And I actually felt very sorry for panel members that had to read such rubbish.
I remember I've sat on a few government panels over the years, and I always just used to read to the point that that somebody had answered, like the criteria. I just read it to the point that they'd addressed it, and then just skim over it. It was
you'll find a person that's written a whole paragraph, a whole belief statement with no evidence, which is a complete waste of space.
Yeah.
You know, you only need to open with a sentence and then just go straight through to the evidence, because that's what panel members are after. They want the evidence.
Yeah. Probably a good note to ask you about what are the things that people do that will we sort of touched on the waffle and the filler and stuff like that, but what else do people do that will eliminate them from being considered?
Oh, where do I get started?
We've got a list.
It's a great process of eliminating people. Okay, first and foremost, answer all the criteria. Don't leave any blank.
Yeah.
And don't put, because sometimes you'll find that there's almost a repetition in the selection criteria, and you think, but I've already answered that. Please refer to selection criteria. No, don't. You actually have to address each and one, because each and one is marked and scored. So if you don't address one, that's going to leave you out the loop of getting those marks to get shortlisted. The second one that I'd say, which I've already covered off, is don't waste your time on applying for something that you're not qualified for, because you're not going to get a look in, regardless of, if you're Einstein could not get a commissioner police role because he doesn't have a background in policing. You know what I mean? So, because the problem with government, it's they're recruiting on the basis of merit, not talent. Okay, so you just got to keep that in mind. Not providing the right evidence. A lot of people fall into this trap of providing the wrong examples. I covered this briefly in terms of we were talking about communication skills. You've got to nail the right examples against the right job to provide that evidence. Those will be the three ones. Get the application in on time. I have had people successfully secure extensions, and you can get them in writing if you need to get an extension, but I would say that's a rarity these days because the competition is so stiff. So just make sure you just get in on time, otherwise that just won't happen. And follow the application process down to a T. So a lot of people make the mistake of submitting the wrong documentation or not submitting the right documentation. Make sure that that's all in. So I think those would be the main ones.
It's funny that because people do have very specific things for you to put in sometimes, and they call it a cull, and I think they call it a cull for a reason. It's they want to eliminate you versus finding reasons to put you in. You've got to make it easy for them. So yeah,
we got a question from Balin that what he has observed is that most of the cases is the internal candidate gets selected.
That's correct.
In selection criteria, and I think that's it has happened with me. I've shared that story even before as well. It's spend 8-10 hours of writing 17 selection criteria, and asking friend to look over that, and everything else is absolutely amazing, and then you get to know that somebody internally who used to work in casual role has been selected, right? This doesn't happen in all the cases, but there's still a risk of this, right? And I think that's what in a lot of people also tell me that's why they don't bother about writing those
things.
No. Anyway,
submit it, get those applications in. I can tell you that 2 points that I'll make is that I was reading somewhere, it was a couple of years ago, so these statistics might be a little bit off and things like that, but I know that in the equivalent to the Department of Home Affairs, 48% of the people securing positions were outside of the department. It was some statistic like that. So this idea that only a tiny percentage of externals are getting jobs are wrong. But for those externals to actually get into those departments, particularly things like the Australian Taxation Office and things like that, you just need to temper your expectations and go for a lower classification level, because at the higher classification levels there is the expectation that you've already had the pre-existing knowledge, whereas at the more entry level, say APS 3, 4, 5, then they're more open to externals. So that would be the first thing I'd say for people wanting to get in. And the second thing is government's fabulous. The jobs in there are fabulous. I mean, if you're a professional manager and executive, the stuff they do is just fabulous. So don't write it off as a career option, because the stuff people do in government is really meaningful and impactful. And even during this COVID-19, everything from that director in Australian Taxation Office working rapidly through all the pitfalls and shortfalls of, the JobKeeper package, rapidly having to put that out to millions of Australians, or, the counsellor and diplomat that had to tie up rapid negotiations with the United States, or the policy officer that's now into COVID intelligence operations, or even, the APS 5 that had to rapidly learn new legislation to meet the impacts of going, effectively away from the office to meet COVID. Like I said, this is just the beginning of my tales for what's been happening and for my clients in the last month. But government is exciting. So, if you've got the patience and if you learn how to write an application, because most people aren't getting interviews not because they shouldn't get selected for interviews, because they're writing really lousy applications. So they've got to learn how to write the good applications, and in that way they will still get those interviews, and the opportunities in government are sensational.
Wow, you're a real ambassador for jobs, and I think I'm just about to go off this call and start applying, Carolyn.
No, I mean, and the beautiful thing about it is when the budget that's been handed down recently by the federal government never made the headlines, but they're making way for an expansion in federal public service. A Liberal coalition government who always does the cuts are now going to rapidly expand the public sector. So there are opportunities out there.
Yeah. Just a really interesting point that you've made, because I think, people don't apply for government jobs. Maybe because they don't know the right level that they, should. But so would you say that it's more the entry level or mid-tier that it's easier to get in to the public sector versus the
I would say to a professional manager, never ever go right to the bottom. You don't need to be there. But if you're from an external and you're going, you've been a mid-level manager and you want to bounce straight into the senior executive level, probably forget about that. But if you take yourself down a notch or two, get in, learn what government's about, because government's like a total alien world compared to the private sector, right? There's so much to learn. So get in a notch or two down, and if you're successful, you'll rapidly be promoted. So, I worked for a guy, and he started off, I think, about APS 5, I think, and he was a very talented guy. Within 2 years, he was in the senior executive level. So it's not like he had to be packed or kept out. It was just his opportunity of getting into the particular department that he really wanted.
Yeah. And how much does networking, in the private sector, you can reach out and you can network and you can meet people and jobs can be created, and your resume gets the halo effect if it gets passed to somebody who's recruiting. Does that happen within the public sector as well? How much does that sort of relationship or networking help with an application?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
It might help to pick up a contract role, a temporary short contract role, where they'll rapidly put you into a contract role for something that's coming up. But that networking and the nod and the tap on the shoulder is called nepotism, and that's what legislation is in place to stop that best buddy or getting that job. I mean, if you want to get into the public service sector, the connections I would make were actually for recruiters that recruit for government, because then they can put you forward for the jobs that are coming up within their portfolio. And also, people within the departments, asking for contracts or tips or get insider knowledge. But in terms of securing a connection with a decision maker, to secure a full-time government job, I just don't think you're going to get much headway with that.
Yeah.
Because they've got to be seen to be doing the right thing. I mean, they can certainly give you a tip as to, yes, this job's coming up. They also might be able to help you review your application and give you insight, critique with that. But even those are borderline behaviours, because I know in Queensland that if a boss advertised a job and then gave it to their mate and their mate applied and then they critiqued and helped them with that job, that would be considered a breach and a sackable offence under the way that the legislation's written.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So you might get some insights from talking to people that work there, but not it's really, beyond that. That's Yeah,
and like I said, I think the most important connections you can probably make are those private-based independent recruiters that are out there that hire rapidly, particularly for those contract roles, because that's another good way to get into government, actually, is to get a contract role within government, and then you start getting a really good insight of government, and then you've got a portfolio from within government you can talk about.
Because sometimes in those contracts you don't need to address this, it's just...
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And many of them still have the selection process, but they're generally not quite so complex, because they basically want to get people in very rapidly into positions. And the classic example was recently with the COVID crisis. They needed to get an extensive lot of frontline staff at Centrelink. So those were all contract-based roles that they just pushed people in very quickly into those roles.
Yep.
If I can, I've just got last question from my side is around the applicant tracking system. I would imagine that this selection criteria responses are read by the panel members. They are not scanned through an applicant terrorizing system, as we like to call that. But they are physically read by someone.
Yeah, they're physically read, and that is another reason why you should ramble. Feel sorry for the people having to read them.
I'll sneak a couple more questions in if I can. Where does the resume and the cover letter sit with the selection criteria? Okay. Are they just looking at the selection criteria? Are they looking at the resume and cover letter as well?
Okay, I'd say in the past, the resume was a secondary supporting documentation. And if you do have traditional selection criteria, that is still the case. But these days, because selection criteria is so short and precise, can be down to 700 words, they are using the resume as well to assess. So both are equally important. So many applications now only have a resume and a covering letter. Now, the covering letter isn't your traditional, "Dear Joe, please find attached, I'm a wonderful person, talk later, yours sincerely" type of cover letter, although a cover letter should never be that, as you know. But people get the sense that that's what a cover letter is. But a cover letter for government also has to include evidence of your ability to meet those particular criteria. But because government is competitive and increasingly competitive, I think you personally these days, even if you are only writing selection criteria, I think it really helps to have a powerful resume as well.
Yeah.
That's excellent. We don't have any more questions from the audience. Carolyn, thank you very much, for joining us and demystifying the selection criteria. At least I get the nightmares when somebody asks me to even say, "Nishad, can you help me?" And I said, "Can you just go on YouTube this, Google this?" Because I think you'll probably get better advice than someone like me, because I've written for myself and I was successful at doing that. But when it comes, because I know my story, I know what I've done. But when it comes to really doing it, or I just sometimes quote exorbitant price so that they never call me as well. So that's been my strategy. But I will now refer them to Carolyn. What's the best way for people to reach out to you, Carolyn?
Just through my website. So you'll just find me at carolynsmith.com.au. and then all my contact details are there. I've also got free resources on how to write selection criteria if you want to get started. My paper that you can download, it covers all sorts of things about job search, but it does have 2 or 3 crucial chapters on selection criteria, which will go over the basics that you need. And I know some people have actually downloaded this and got back to me and said, I nailed it after just reading those short resources. So, and then, so that's where you can get started, where you can reach out to me.
And you've got a book as well.
I do have a book.
Yep.
It's the most exciting book in the world. So you must read it. It's like how to get in and get promoted in the public service sector. And I cover everything. I cover the process. I cover the internal nepotism. I ask the questions that you need to ask the contact officer. I cover all the things that will get you eliminated in the process in way more detail. I outline more of the methodologies because STAR is just one of the methodologies. There's CAR, SPAR, SAR, you name it, they're all there. And also in terms of people don't realise, how to address behavioural questions, 2-page, 1-page cover letters, the whole works, how to the integrated leadership framework, if you're an executive, just nailing the New South Wales performance things, it's all in there, and it's a really budget-friendly way. Because obviously if you're going to work for me, it's way more expensive because it's even time-consuming for me to write these.
I was going to say that. Well, that sounds like absolute gold because I think, everybody needs help. But Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. You've given us real insight and probably taken the pain away for quite a few people who are watching this. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Do you want to talk about what's happening tomorrow, Kate?
Yes, so tomorrow we're on the theme of career change because I know a lot of people are wanting to pivot or change during this time by necessity. So we've got Serena Lowe, who's been on this show. She's been a lawyer in Singapore. She came to Australia and changed her career to become a coach. And we're going to talk through how she did it, which is all those how-to stories are really, really interesting. And then on Wednesday, we've got a guest from the UK who's going to talk about, I've got to get this in the right order, 2 weeks, 7 applications, 3 interviews. He found a job within 2 weeks and he basically hacked Google searches and hacked networking in a nice way. So a really interesting conversation around how to accelerate your results by getting in a group and using technology. So that's going to be absolutely fascinating. And then on Friday, we've got our 150th show. So come and say hi and wish us happy anniversary, for want of a better word. So, that's what's coming up for this week.
Yes, that's right. So until we see you tomorrow, everyone, please look after yourself. Victoria is still not out of the woods. Please make sure that you wear the mask as you go outside. We are quite happy that at least the primary school kids are in the school, and we have just outsourced our headache to other people as well. So that's how I would like to put it that way. My home was very quiet today, but thank you again, Carolyn, and we will see you tomorrow, everyone. Have a great evening. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.